Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Welcome to the Church of Jesus, the Good Shepherd, for this fourth and final evening, all about the Beatitudes. Thank you. We've had a great representation of any number of people of our parish and beyond. So thank you to all of our visitors who are here present, especially Dr. Cheryl White, who has 4 times made the journey from Shreveport back and forth to be here with us. Thank you for doing so. And we could have made this a 9-part series, as it normally was, as she told you, but it's nice to have this little kind of mini-series in the context of the beginning of the summer. But whether you realize it or not, what she and I have been doing is getting you ready for next week. Monday, the church begins a 3-week cycle of readings, the Sermon on the Mount. Monday, we hear the Beatitudes, Matthew chapter 5. So everything that we've been talking about gets us ready for what the rest of the entire church world will be hearing. Now, we don't have Mass here on Monday, but you're reading your readings, hopefully at home, or listening to them on any type of a podcast, hollow, or whatever it is that you might be using. So you will hear the Beatitudes. All Saints, November 1st, Holy Day of Obligation, the Gospel reading, the Beatitudes. Blessed are those, etc. Blessed, you are saints. You are saints if you do this, that, the other. The kingdom of heaven is yours. You will be children of God, etc. So we are on this path of the Beatitudes, want to be people of the Beatitudes, because we all want to be saints. We all want to get to heaven, to participate in the kingdom of heaven, which we're supposed to be building up here on earth. Now, Jesus, it says at the very beginning of Matthew chapter 5, that he was walking with his apostles, and then he sat down. Jesus was, this is Greek, here's your Greek lesson today, peripatetic. You're like, what? Peripatetic. What does that mean? Peri, around, patetic, pateo, to walk. So, he was a rabbi who would walk with his apostles and teach along the way. You're watching Chosen, we mentioned that a couple of times already. You know, what is he doing? He's walking with, sometimes out front, sometimes in the middle, sometimes behind, but he's with. He teaches this way. But when he sits down, as it says at the beginning of Matthew 5, because he's been walking through all these villages, he sits down. This is an act of basically saying, listen up. In the Gospel of Matthew, at the beginning, it says, he sat down and he began to teach. What it really says, if you're reading the original Greek, it says, Jesus sits down and opens his mouth and speaks. Okay, now wait a minute. You open your mouth and then you speak. This is St. Matthew's way of, you really have to listen to what is about to happen next. So for us, we're reading it in English, it just sounds like, okay, he's going to sit down, chill out a little bit, he's been walking around. No, this is Matthew's way of setting the scene, and then, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So we've done the first 6. We have 7 and 8 to go. We will have Dr. Cheryl White lead us in the reflection, especially meditating on what St. Jerome and St. Augustine had to say about the Beatitudes. We'll kind of sort of wrap it up. We'll have question and answers, and then everyone will be free to go further enlightened by sacred scripture and the catechism yesterday. Anyone go home and read the catechism at some point? Okay, 3 people. All right. 1716. Remember, go back there. 1716. 17. It's not that long. It really isn't that long. So, right now, you're the ones seated, but she's about to open her mouth and speak. Dr. Cheryl White, thank you. No pressure.
No pressure. Except, of course, as I pointed out on Monday night, that when Jesus sat on that sweet, gentle slope and opened his mouth and began to teach, that was God incarnate speaking on that sweet, gentle slope. So, yeah, no comparison here. I would also like to point out that I have driven back and forth 4 days in a row in the snow all the way, both ways. I actually want to address that because so many of you have been very sweet about saying something to me about that. And there's a couple of things maybe that, as you get to know me better, you'll understand. First of all, I love a road trip. I do love a road trip. It is a time when I'm able to decompress. I'm usually able to do the thinking or the planning or the praying that I need to do. I get phone calls taken care of. I'm listening to podcasts. And that 90 minutes passes very quickly. So please don't feel like I'm putting myself out to come here, because the reward for me, we've been talking about the rewards of the Beatitudes. The reward for me has been this incredibly warm and wonderful and welcoming group, and thank you for that. You've really been wonderful, so thank you very much. So we're going to begin tonight with Beatitude number 7. The Beatitude of the Peacemakers is actually not in the 7th order by chance. Are you all picking up on the fact that these are in a specific order for a very specific reason? There's no accident to this. Remember, we talked about this God incarnate speaking, that there is a beautiful harmony and unity already in it because of its source. And so this 7th one is not there by accident. St. Jerome actually reminds us that in the biblical tradition, this is from his commentary, in the biblical tradition, the number 7, of course, is completeness, fullness, perfection. We touched on that a little bit last night. So God created the world, and then on the 7th day, we are invited to do what? Rest. To rest. To rest in a particular way and embrace God's peace. So what is the 7th day Jewish salutation? Shabbat Shalom. Right, Shabbat Shalom. It's a salutation expressing a wish for peace, and not just an absence of conflict, but there's this kind of fullness that resonates in that. Think about this. The greeting for the Sabbath is one of peace, because it is complete. The work is finished. The number of completion. Okay, so can we talk for just a moment, or consider for just a moment, what is the opposite of peace?
Chaos.
Okay, throw some word salads at me. I got chaos, war, anger. Okay, conflict seems like an obvious one, right? The opposite of peace would be war or conflict. But I heard some other words, and I think that that's important, because peace, a lack of peace can also be, the opposite of peace can also be things like frustration, like worry, loneliness. St. Augustine reminds us that it's not necessarily overt conflict that we're talking about in Blessed Are the Peacemakers. The opposite of peace, and it took me a long time to understand this myself, can also just be the opposite of joy. It's just the opposite of joy. With this beatitude in the 7th place, we know that those who living according to the verse 6 will have this peace. Think about how it permeates the other 6 we've already talked about. So if you open your list, open your book to your list, and I know that I put this up there every night, and then I say to you what, I know you can't read that, but I always feel like I need to let you know where we are. But you also have it in your book. Think about how this works with the other 6. Humility leads to peace. And why is that? Because pride is the enemy of peace. It's the enemy of peace. It's the sworn enemy of everything that's good. Mourning and consolation. Someone who mourns their own sin and experiences that divine consolation has the gift of peace. Think about how you feel when you leave the confessional. Think about that. When you leave the confessional, think right now, what are some words you have actually either said out loud or thought to yourself when you left the confessional? Oh boy, I feel so good. Or that feels peaceful. So yeah, so what about meekness and gentleness? I mean, that doesn't express itself except in peace. When you've met someone who responds to you with this kind of gentleness that we're talking about in that beatitude, there's a discernible peace about that person and that situation. It's palpable. That gentleness comes across to us as peace. An absence of gentleness, however, when we encounter that in another, evokes anything but peace, right? It's turmoil at the level of the soul. So hungering and thirsting for justice, or hungering and thirsting for righteousness. We're going to talk about that word again. There's the vocabulary quiz. What's the word in Greek?
Oh,
Dikaios. Very good. Y'all remember that. Yeah, excellent. So we're going to talk about it again here in just a minute. Hungering and thirsting for righteousness or justice. That dikaios. As Psalm 119 says, great peace have those who love the law and seek justice. Okay, so moving on. The merciful, mercy. One who cannot forgive is never going to have peace. Right? Purity of heart. Someone who loves and respects others as created in the image of God will have peace. Peace. Think about it. We cannot give away what we don't have. So there is an urgency to this one. There is a real urgency in this one. Blessed are the peacemakers. Think about what this urgency might be. Peacemakers. Are you making peace with the world or yourself? And if the answer is C, okay, so it's A, B, C. The answer is C, and it's both A and B, that you're making peace with yourself and you're making peace in the world. Which one of those do you think probably needs to come first?
Yourself.
As much as possible to make peace with yourself. That's exactly right. So when we talk about this urgency, this is something that actually St. Augustine talks about, is there's an urgency, he says, to this beatitude because it is critical to reconcile and correct anything that is in me that is disturbing my peace. It's urgent, he says. And this is why. He says, because whatever is within that is not at peace is going to be open. Some translations of him say vulnerable. Whatever is within me that is not at peace, at least it's a pleasant ringtone. I'm not having to listen to rap music at 12 in the morning. Whatever is not at peace in me is vulnerable to a force of deception. Okay, think about this. Think about what I'm saying. And division. A force that might alluringly promise something to me that's going to fix it. Yeah? If you don't feel good, if your soul's in turmoil and you are not at peace, what is the warning? What is the urgency? Are we just looking for something to fix it? To make me feel better? It's like a gate left open. St. Augustine uses this expression. You're leaving the gate open for demons. Now think about what that might mean. It would be things like substance abuse, alcohol, sex, overeating, whatever it is. But it's something that we think is going to make us feel better. So peace, he says, is urgent. Because when you don't want to face whatever that thing is, that situation, that conflict, let's numb that. Let's numb that, and now let's invite in something else that's going to disturb my peace. And do you see how you created a new problem and you just perpetuate the cycle? So this is why St. Augustine says this one particularly has an urgency to it. And sometimes peace means actually having to move through conflict. You actually have to do that. Sometimes it can mean confrontation. Sometimes it can mean just dealing with whatever that ugly thing is in front of you. But the peace also hints at something that is not of this world. It's not something that I can do. John's Gospel, chapter 14 at the beginning, if you have your Bible. I was so pleased to see so many of you walk in with your Bibles tonight. By night 4, you actually got it into Bibles. I think that's very good. Very good. John's Gospel, chapter 14, at the very beginning. Let not your hearts be troubled. And then a little later he says, peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. Not as the world gives do I give you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. So this isn't worldly peace necessarily that we're talking about. At the end of John's chapter 16, he says this to his disciples, I have said this to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have trouble. But be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. So this is the kind of peace that will make you a target. That's what I'm talking about. The enemy is going to detest it if you are at peace. Have y'all ever felt this? Like things are going along really well and you have that sense, that sense of being at peace. And I would say, sometimes I've used this expression, it's the peace that really passes all understanding, because all around me there is chaos. This is my life. All around me there is chaos, and many, many days I stop just to marvel at the fact that I have a peace about me. And that's not what I do. That is a grace. I promise you that is a grace. But it's the kind of thing that's going to make you a target, because the enemy detests this. He knows that this is where the Spirit of God dwells, is in that peaceful heart that can truly love and mirror God more perfectly. Okay, so when something happens to threaten your peace, say some problem or conflict, which order do we do things in? Do we resolve the issue and then seek peace? Or do we seek peace and then resolve the problem? Which thing should we do first? You have to seek the peace first. Put that thing aside and seek God's peace. Ask for it, pray for it. Specifically, maybe look at this Beatitude, going back and starting with number 1, to make sure that you have humbled yourself, that you recognized your sin, that you are in that proper orientation in the relationship with God. And when you ask for that peace, then you can look to the problem. Then you can look to the issue, the conflict. It kind of has to be in that order. As St. Padre Pio said, right, remember, pray and don't worry. Pray and don't worry. Jesus promises, I have overcome the world. Okay, so the second part of this Beatitude. Peacemakers will be called the children of God. Why? Why do you think that is? Remember, we have the blessed, we have the condition or circumstance in which we find ourselves. What is the reward here? To be children of God. Why do you think it says we would be children of God if we are peacemakers?
We have no worry.
Okay, we'll have no worry. Actually, you can have worry and still be at peace. You know, you can achieve a level of peace with that. Absolutely. Because you cannot hide that under a bushel basket. You cannot. None of these can you put under the bushel basket and hide it. Peace. We are going to be children of God if we are peacemakers because it resembles Him. Not because of anything I do, but because I resemble Him when I am at peace. And don't get the idea either. I remember when I gave this a more expanded version of this for that 9-part series. This kind of came up in one of the conversations. And don't ever think that peace somehow means sitting still. Like, I'm totally at peace, I don't have to do anything. Those who give themselves to God never lack for work, let me tell you that. They never lack for work, and they often have more work than they want to have. So it's not about sitting still either. This is a peace that comes from resting in the knowledge that God has indeed overcome the world, and whatever that thing is that is disturbing your peace has already been resolved. It's already settled. So then we can become peacemakers, and only then can we live the 8th Beatitude. The acceptance of suffering, persecution and suffering as grace. And how does that 8th one end? What is our reward? The kingdom of heaven. So just as in the first, the poor in spirit inherit the kingdom of heaven, so do those who suffer persecution. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So remember, that's that sort of bracket we've been talking about all week. That this is the kingdom. This is the kingdom that we're talking about. Because as the book ends, the barriers, if you want to think about that way, these are those fences that hold us in the kingdom of heaven, is this idea of humility and the acceptance of suffering. That those two things really, like all of these, cannot be separated. They continue to just make a beautiful loop. Because now you're going to be right back at number 1. This one promises as a reward the possession of the kingdom. Okay? Now, persecution. Persecution, has taken many different forms in the history of the church. I mean, all you have to do is look at church history, and you see this very quickly. That it's taken a lot of different forms through the ages. It's been a lot of different types of manifestations individually, in communities, in entire nations. Some maybe perhaps more prominent on the radar than others. But it's been a constant feature of the Christian faith since the earliest days of the faith. It can be either overt or it can be covert persecution. It can be some sort of like horrific blood martyrdom, or it could be simply being hated for what you believe. Like the other Beatitudes, this 8th one is also rooted in the Old Testament. The Old Covenant that God made with Israel, for instance. I think this context is important to understanding this. The hostility toward the prophets, for example. Have you ever thought about this? The hostility towards the prophets. And that's a great example. It doesn't have anything to do with the person, but it has to do with the hatred of God and an attempt to destroy God's plan and God's message, or to somehow subvert, interrupt, detour God's message. What results in this struggle, and it is a struggle, what results in this struggle between the evil and the good, that is God, evil opposes the establishment of the covenant, the new covenant. Evil opposes the establishment of the church, as it does all other expressions of God's mercy and God's goodness. So those who are persecuted among Christians, for instance, let's get specifically to that, those who suffer for Christ, that is a very special gift. And I suppose we wouldn't think of it that way, would we? It is a very special gift. Why? Why would that kind of suffering be a gift? To imitate Christ, to more closely imitate Christ. See, I don't think there's an accident that this one ends at number 8. Because if you've worked all of these, if you've gotten through all of these, you should be like Christ at this point. Well, as close as you're going to be here, right? That process of theosis is actually a beautiful term. I love in Eastern Orthodoxy, they call it theosis, where you actually grow and grow and grow to becoming more like God. And in this sort of progression of virtue, progression of humility, will lead you to this. So that's not surprising this is number 8. But this kind of suffering for the gospel, which is the truth, of course, requires a decision from us. Okay? It requires a decision that is radical and definitive. You have to make a choice to separate from the world, a world which promises nothing, by the way. You have to separate from the world, darkness, from the world that would tell us life is all about the here and now, that there is no higher call. So this kind of suffering allows us to enter directly into the suffering of Christ. Does anyone know anyone who has really lived this beatitude? I mean, we talk about suffering in our day. Okay, so right now, there is some federal legislation, and some of you may have seen it, that's going to impact the way that certain teachings of the church are actually going to be in direct conflict with some federal policies and federal funding for instance, healthcare institutions and higher educational institutions. This is actually going on right now as we speak. The state of Louisiana, this is a very real issue. So, for instance, I might say, well, I'm suffering for the faith because of something my university is requiring me to do that goes against my Catholic faith. Right? To which, so far, I have responded by putting the Vatican flag on my door of my office. Tiny, tiny little acts of defiance, civil disobedience, I suppose. But is that really suffering?
It's on your mind all the time.
So here's the thing. Do you know anybody that's really lived this beatitude? I'm talking about suffering to the point of losing their life. There's a hint. We have 5 servants of God in the Diocese of Shreveport. That's not persecution, but it's suffering, and it's suffering for the faith. So the way that St. Augustine read this particular beatitude, those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, because of the way we've already defined righteousness way back a few beatitudes ago, that word diakos in the Greek, which translates, remember, as righteousness or justice, that because we've already defined that way, this can be someone who is suffering for the gospel directly. The righteousness and justice of God's order, God's perfect order. So yeah, we have 5 servants of God in Shreveport. Is this not the highest expression of love? And it is suffering. It's suffering for the gospel. And also, I think, seen in the ultimate expression of the love of Jesus, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. How much does God love us? He became one of us. And he became one of us so he could do what? To suffer. He became one of us so he could suffer and die as one of us. I've always been struck by something, and you have already heard this. I bet you probably did hear this during Christmas from Father Peter. If you didn't, I don't want to give anything away for next year, but you may have already heard it. That I've always been struck by during the Christmas season. Of course, as soon as we hit the Christmas season, there's that beautiful change in liturgical color to white on the Feast of the Nativity. Joy, right? And then on the very next day, what are we? Red. On the very next day, we are red, the Feast of St. Stephen, the first martyr. So there is a beautiful, harmonious message in that, just in that, the practical sort of rhythm of life of the church, the liturgical life the church gives us. God gave himself to us, he enters the world, and now we must completely give ourselves to him. He loves without measure, and he asks us to do the same. So how do we live this beatitude? Most of us are not going to face overt persecution. Yet. I mean, anything can happen, right? But most of us are probably not going to face that kind of overt persecution. So we pray for those who do, because there are places in the world that do. We also pray for their own sufferings, that they may be united to Christ. All of our sufferings, that we may unite them to Christ, even if it's not the direct result of me being persecuted in that way. But, although we might not suffer direct, overt persecution like that, are we all going to suffer?
Yes.
You betcha. Will we hurt?
Especially if we live a devout Catholic life, we are going to.
Yeah. Yeah, so we will see others. I mean, will we ever be mistreated? Will we ever be, somebody going to hurt our feelings because of our faith? Yeah. We're going to see other people. We'll see other Christians mistreated, perhaps. And we should always be peacemakers, seeking to restore that justice, that righteousness, as we talked about it the other night. Righteousness being God's perfect order before any of this was messed up, when pride entered the world. Before any of that happened, God's order was perfect. So all of these have been about the kingdom of heaven, restorative work. Restorative work that requires a certain posture from us. It requires our submission. It requires our surrender and our acceptance of that. And it can require a special discernment that actually dovetails back into all of these Beatitudes. When I'm hurt, treated unjustly, unkindly, when I'm dealing with these emails I get from Baton Rouge, for example, do I really need to defend myself with words? I have found one thing about myself, that actually, this kind of made my jaw drop the first time this was pointed out to me. I am far more quick, always, to speak up in defense of another person than I am of myself. Some of you might be that way too. I'm far more quick to do that. You know, if it's something to do with me, I am more likely to just keep my mouth shut. And I used to think that maybe, what was the word we used the other night for gentleness, meek? What was the word we tend to think of? Mousy? Yeah, I used to think maybe that's what that was. But this is actually a grace. It's actually a grace because, and I've come to realize that, it's not being a doormat. It's sometimes best to submit to injustice quietly. Do y'all know this? To submit to it quietly, and then, because especially sometimes when you speak against it, you just incur more conflict. And when you incur more conflict, then I can end up being unjust to others. This is that same paradox we looked at when we talked about this issue of justice the other night. Does that make sense? So it's better to let evil think it won the day than be an active participant and let it know it won the day. Actually, this is a posture that thwarts evil. Turn the other cheek. If someone sues you for your tunic, you give him your cloak also. If anybody forces you to go a mile with him, you go 2 miles with him. So if you are persecuted, you suffer because you carry the Christian identity card, right? And there is your Christian identity card. So to go back to what I introduced this entire series with, so remember what I do as a teacher? I tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then I tell you, and then I tell you what I told you. This is not hard. Teaching's not hard. You tell people what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. So let's go back and look back real quickly to that first night when we introduced this entire series, and I told you that my inspiration for this came from Pope Francis, but these are timeless, universal, obviously the most significant gospel passage of the first couple of centuries anyway, because it is Matthew chapter 5 that is the most commented on, even in those early commentaries. In the earliest text of Matthew that were in circulation, this is the chapter that was generating the most literature and the most examination and exploration. It's that central and that core to leading the Christian life. So I want to go back and credit Pope Francis for giving me that inspiration, talking about this being the Christian identity card. And I also want to give great credit to St. Jerome, St. Augustine, and to a lesser extent, St. Ambrose of Milan, who also wrote a commentary on the Gospel of Matthew, all seeing it this way, that this is a kingdom call. It's the highest call you have. It's the hardest thing you're ever going to do. And guess what? That's why we have to do it. So, what is the end of this? The end of this is the kingdom of heaven. Welcome to the kingdom of heaven. Guess what? Yours is it. It's that easy, right? Oh, yeah. Yeah, why are y'all shaking your heads? It's not easy. Okay, I want to again say thank you for allowing me to do this. I've been very gifted as well. Whenever I have an opportunity to do any kind of a teaching like this, it challenges me to get into not only a particular mindset, but it also challenges me to dig a little deeper for myself. So, as I said, you can't share what you don't have. And I'm very grateful for that. And thank you so much for your warmth, your hospitality, and maybe we'll see you again soon. Thank you. Questions? Comments? Thoughts? Yeah, that's your Christian identity card. Humble, penitent, gentle, seeking justice, merciful, pure of heart, peacemaker, willing to suffer. Which one of those is the hardest? The most difficult? Isn't it interesting that that's the first one? Yeah, and it really does work this way. And again, I would encourage you, I mean, you can read St. Augustine's commentary on the Gospel of Matthew is completely full text format online. It has been out of copyright for a very long time, about 1,600 years. So you should be able to go and read it if you're interested. Some English translations are better than others, but he mines this so deeply and richly. As does St. Jerome. I would not recommend him first. Y'all know why he's my favorite, right? His feast day, he decided to have his feast day on my birthday. But no, actually, I kind of developed a great affection for St. Jerome when I was in graduate school. And the first time I was assigned to read his correspondence with others. And there's some correspondence he has with, speaking about living the Beatitudes, there's a correspondence that he has with a priest named Vigilantius, and you can't make that up. But they're having a dispute about veneration of relics. And St. Jerome finds himself in the position of having to defend this practice of venerating relics. And he just chews the man out. And I mean, up one side and down the other, calls him some kind of a heretical monster and some other epithets. And then, in writing to another priest about Vigilantius, he opens the letter with, "I cannot mention this man's name without using profanity." And that's when I realized that if St. Jerome was a saint, so could I be. I'm going to suggest stop in there.
Right, if St. Jerome had to go through the canonization process, he probably wouldn't make it today. So, okay, so we've done the Beatitudes. What's the next part of the Sermon on the Mount?
Salt and light.
Salt and light.
You are the light of the world.
You are to be salt. You are to be light. So that's my closing comment to you. We live the Beatitudes, and now for the rest of this, for your family, for the community, here at JGS and beyond, let's be salt, let's be light to the world. Thank you again, Dr. Cheryl White, and we are looking for some donations to cover the costs related to all of the different programs, the handouts that we gave you, and other than that, go in peace. Thank you.